It was supposed to be a fresh start, a new chapter. After years of living in cramped apartments, my husband, Ben, and I had finally found the perfect house, a charming two-story in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. Nestled at the edge of the community, it was tucked away behind a cluster of pine trees that felt like a perfect embrace from nature. The house had everything we dreamed of: spacious rooms, a cozy backyard, and a sense of privacy that came with the surrounding woods. But we hadn't just bought a house. We had bought into the idea of a perfect neighborhood, or so we thought. We moved in during late fall, just in time for the holiday season. I was eager to decorate the house for Christmas, to hang the lights and garlands, and to turn our home into the festive haven I'd always wanted. I envisioned a tall, towering tree in the corner of the living room, a fireplace crackling with warmth, and an abundance of presents waiting to be unwrapped. The thought of being surrounded by the scents of pine and cinnamon filled me with excitement. But there was something I hadn't anticipated, something that would soon threaten to ruin our peaceful holiday dream. It started with a knock on the door. Ben was out running errands, so I answered it myself. Standing on the other side was a woman in her mid-40s, with platinum blonde hair styled in a tight bob and dressed in a designer jacket that looked a little too fancy for a suburban street. She had the kind of expression that made you feel like you'd been caught doing something wrong, even when you were innocent. "I'm Karen," she said, her tone cold, but with a forced politeness that felt off. "I'm the president of the HOA. I smiled, extending my hand to introduce myself, but she didn't take it. "I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," she said, then quickly glanced down at my front yard. "However, I couldn't help but notice your tree." My smile faltered. The tree in question was a 12-foot pine, freshly cut from a nearby farm, placed proudly on our front lawn for the holidays. It wasn't overly extravagant, just a simple tree surrounded by a few strings of lights. "What about it?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Karen's lips tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly. "According to our HOA rules, Christmas trees are only allowed to be displayed inside the home, not on the front lawn." I stared at her, unsure if she was joking. It was early December, and here I was, already being told how to decorate for the holidays. "But it's just a tree," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "It's part of the holiday spirit. It's not even blocking the sidewalk." Karen's gaze hardened. "We have rules for a reason. We want to maintain the aesthetic of the neighborhood. If you want to keep that tree up, you'll need to move it inside." I was stunned. It felt ridiculous, but the more I looked at Karen's unblinking stare, the more I realized she wasn't kidding. And she wasn't the type of person to let something small slide. "Okay, I'll think about it," I said, trying to end the conversation. She nodded curtly, then turned on her heel and marched off without another word. As she walked away, I felt a wave of frustration building inside me. Who was she to tell me what I could and couldn't do in my own front yard? I shook my head, dismissing her overbearing attitude. Maybe I'd just take the tree down, but the more I thought about it, the more it irritated me. It wasn't like I was putting up a massive inflatable Santa or a neon reindeer. It was a tree, a Christmas tree. It didn't seem like something that should have anyone up in arms. Later that evening, Ben and I sat in the living room, the lights of the tree casting a soft glow around us. He was the more easygoing one in our relationship, while I was the type to get worked up about things that felt unjust. "I met our new neighbor today," I told him, recounting Karen's visit. Ben chuckled. "Oh, Karen, huh? That sounds like trouble." "I'm serious," I said. "She wants me to move the tree inside. She says it's against HOA rules." His laughter died down. "You're kidding, right?" "Nope," I said, rubbing my temples. She was so cold about it. "I feel like I'm already being targeted." Ben sighed. "This is why I didn't want to move to an HOA neighborhood. I knew we'd run into this kind of thing. Rules everywhere, people in your business." "I get it," I said, feeling the familiar weight of frustration settle in my chest. "But I'm not taking it down. It's my house. And my tree." Ben gave me a look, one that said he understood my point, but wasn't sure this was worth fighting over. He was always the peacemaker, the one who avoided conflict. But I wasn't about to let Karen, or any HOA, tell me how to celebrate Christmas. The next few days were tense. I tried to focus on other things, wrapping presents, baking cookies, setting up the lights around the porch. But every time I looked outside, I saw that tree on the lawn. And every time I saw it, I couldn't help but think of Karen and how she had tried to impose her rules on me. I had always prided myself on standing up for what was right, even if it meant a little discomfort. I wasn't about to back down. So I decided to take a stand, not just for the tree, but for the principle of it. I went into the garage and pulled out the ladder, determined to give Karen a reason to think twice before messing with me again. I wasn't going to take the tree down, but maybe, just maybe, I could make her think twice about her petty rules. That I stood at the base of the ladder, the cool December air biting at my skin. The pine tree in the yard loomed ahead, its branches swaying gently in the wind. The lights twinkled on the tree, casting a soft glow that felt so perfect for the season. And yet, the more I looked at it, the more I could feel the weight of Karen's presence looming over me, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I wasn't taking it down. Not for her. The idea to escalate had come to me in a moment of clarity, a brief but fiery burst of defiance. If Karen wanted to play by the rules, then I would make sure I played by my rules. I wasn't going to let her dictate how I lived my life in this neighborhood. I started with the ladder, carefully climbing up and adjusting the strands of lights that had already been tangled a bit in the wind. It wasn't much, but it would send a message. I positioned the ladder just so that it stood beneath the tree and reached the topmost branches. I'd already noticed that the pine tree stood at a slight angle in the soil, not perfectly straight. And that's when I saw it, the perfect opportunity. The base of the tree was held in place by a simple, weighty stand that secured it to the ground. But I could tell that it was precariously balanced. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen wasn't just concerned about the aesthetics of the neighborhood. She was using the HOA rules to impose her control over every little detail of my life. This wasn't just about a Christmas tree. It was about power. Her power. I took the plunge. I climbed the ladder, carefully reaching up to the top of the tree and giving it a small but calculated shake. The tree wobbled ever so slightly. It was nothing too noticeable at first, but I could already see the potential. If I gave it a good push, just a little more force, I could make it lean even more. The tree wasn't going to fall, not completely, but a little tilt would make Karen take notice. It would give her a reason to complain, a reason to really complain. My fingers tightened around the branch as I steadied myself on the ladder. I looked across the street, checking to see if anyone was watching. No sign of Karen, but I knew she'd be lurking nearby. People like her always were. And then it hit me. This could be more than just a simple revenge. I could give her something to complain about every day. Make her regret the moment she ever decided to mess with me. I took a breath, and with a swift motion, I gave the tree a decisive push. The trunk swayed dangerously, the top leaning just enough that I could feel the weight shift. The stand wobbled and cracked with a low groan. I stepped back, heart pounding, as the tree continued to tilt, now leaning so far to the right that it was almost at a 45-degree angle. It didn't fall, but it looked like it could. I let out a small, satisfied laugh, feeling a rush of adrenaline. Now, all I had to do was sit back and wait for Karen to show up. And I knew she would. The next morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, I was already pacing the living room. Ben had gone to work, and I was alone, with my cup of coffee, watching through the window. Around 10 a.m., I saw her. Karen, in all her designer-clad glory, striding down the sidewalk toward my house. Her eyes immediately went to the tree, and I could see the muscles in her jaw tense as she took in the sight. The tree, now leaning dangerously, looked as though it might topple at any moment. I watched with bated breath as she walked up to the driveway, eyes fixed on the tree. She didn't knock this time. She simply stood there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, glaring at the tree. For a moment, I wondered if she was going to call the HOA or send some sort of complaint my way. But instead, she did something I didn't expect. She turned on her heel, walked to the sidewalk, and then started staring at my house from across the street. Was she waiting for me to come outside? I wasn't about to make the first move. No way. I waited for what felt like hours, watching her stand there, scowling at my front yard. It was almost like she was trying to force the tree to fall with sheer willpower. But that's the thing about Karen. She wasn't just upset about the tree. She was upset that I had dared to defy her, that I hadn't backed down. And now she was powerless, standing there, doing nothing but fuming. Eventually, she marched back across the street, toward her own house. I saw her stop briefly at the mailbox, probably to check for any letters or complaints from the HOA. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the doorbell rang. I rushed to the door, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. Standing on my doorstep was Karen, her face a picture of fury. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, and her voice was cold, sharp, almost threatening. "I warned you," she spat. "You will take that tree down." I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my voice even. "I don't think I have to. I've already looked through the HOA rules, and there's nothing that says I can't put up a tree on my own property." Karen's eyes widened, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed my words. She wasn't used to being challenged. People like her never were. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the HOA. You'll see. This isn't over." I smiled. "Do your worst." Karen turned on her heel and stormed off, but not before giving me one last glare. I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. She wasn't going to win this time. But as the days passed, I began to wonder what her next move would be. I knew she wasn't the type to let things go easily, and she had the power of the HOA behind her. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I could fight back. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not now. Not after everything she had tried to pull. I just needed to be smarter than her. As the holiday season wore on, the tension between us escalated. Every time I drove past her house, she would be standing in the window, watching, waiting for any excuse to pounce. But what she didn't know was that I had a plan. The days that followed were tense, thick with an unspoken challenge between Karen and me. I could almost feel the heavy weight of her gaze as I moved around my front yard, going about my usual routine. She was always there, lurking just beyond the confines of her manicured lawn, watching like a hawk. I could tell she was waiting for me to slip up, to make one wrong move that would give her the ammunition she needed to call on the HOA. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I had spent the last few days researching the HOA rules, digging through every clause, every tiny stipulation. To my surprise, there was nothing about Christmas trees, or any trees, on private property. The HOA rules were mostly focused on the structural aspects of the homes, like fences, paint colors, and lawn care. Nothing that would apply to something as simple as a tree in the yard. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen's whole power trip was based on her own inflated sense of authority. She was using the HOA as a tool, a way to assert dominance over everyone around her. I couldn't let her win, not over something as trivial as a holiday tree. But I wasn't going to make a scene, either. I wasn't like Karen, loud, domineering, and quick to escalate things. I was going to handle this my way, quietly, methodically. A few days after Karen's last visit, I decided it was time to put my plan into motion. I'd noticed that Karen had a habit of walking her dog at the same time every morning, right around sunrise. It wasn't much, but I knew her routine. And I had one of my own. Every day, I made it a point to bring my trash bins to the curb at exactly the same time. So, one cold morning, just before the first rays of daylight cracked through the horizon, I slipped outside with a small, discreet tool in my pocket, a can of spray paint. I'd thought long and hard about this, but it was the only way to get the HOA involved without directly antagonizing Karen. As I walked to the base of the tree, I crouched low, careful to avoid being seen by any passing cars or early risers. The morning was quiet, except for the crunch of frost beneath my feet. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands as I aimed the nozzle of the spray paint can. A quick burst of white paint splattered across the side of the tree trunk, leaving a clean, unmistakable mark. It wasn't much, just a small streak. But it was enough. I stood up and backed away, my heart thumping in my chest. The paint would draw attention, and the HOA would have no choice but to respond. It was harmless, but to anyone else, it would look like vandalism. A property violation. I turned and hurried back inside, trying to control the exhilaration that was bubbling up inside me. I wasn't a person who usually liked to manipulate situations, but this felt like the right move. If Karen wanted a war, I was ready to fight back, and I was going to win. The next morning, I saw Karen in her usual spot, walking her dog, but this time, she was fuming. Her eyes were locked on the tree, staring at the white mark on the trunk. She paused mid-step, then reached for her phone. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head as she dialed the HOA. I waited, knowing that the ball was now in Karen's court. Around noon, the HOA letter came. It was addressed to me and clearly marked with the HOA's official seal. I opened it carefully, my hands shaking slightly. The letter was stern but polite, outlining a violation of the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. They were requesting that I remove the inappropriate markings on the tree and return the property to a state that was deemed suitable for the community. I didn't even bother to read the rest of it. I knew what this was about. This was Karen's revenge, her attempt to use the system to squash me into submission. But she had no idea what she'd just triggered. I put the letter down and smiled. Later that afternoon, I went outside with a bucket of water, a sponge, and a clean cloth. I could see Karen watching me from her porch, her eyes narrowed, waiting for me to take down the tree or somehow back down. I could almost hear her thoughts echoing in my mind. She's going to give in. She'll remove it, just like everyone else who can't stand up to the HOA. But I didn't remove the tree. Instead, I started washing the mark off the trunk. Slowly, deliberately. I made sure Karen could see me clearly from her window. After all, it wasn't the mark that mattered. It was the principle behind it. As I scrubbed, I noticed Karen walking toward her front yard. Her pace was brisk, purposeful. She stopped at the edge of her driveway and stared, arms crossed, as I worked. I didn't acknowledge her, but I knew she was watching me. When the mark was gone, I straightened up and wiped my hands on my pants, taking a moment to enjoy the stillness. The tree stood tall again, unmarked and undisturbed. Karen didn't speak. She just stood there, watching. Then, without a word, she turned on her heel and marched back inside. I stood there for a moment longer, wondering if this was truly the end of it. The next morning, as I was walking to my car, I saw the HOA notice in my mailbox again. This time, the tone was more conciliatory, almost apologetic. They had reviewed my case and found that the mark on the tree was, in fact, harmless and likely caused by natural wear. There was no need to remove the tree, they wrote, and they were officially closing the complaint. I laughed. It wasn't the victory I expected, but it felt just as sweet. In the following days, things seemed to calm down. Karen stopped her daily patrols, her presence becoming less frequent. She no longer stared at my house with the same intensity, and I could tell that she had realized something. I wasn't going to be intimidated by her or the HOA. I continued to decorate for Christmas, each new addition to the yard feeling like a small victory. The lights on the tree twinkled brightly, and I spent my evenings sipping hot cocoa by the fire, knowing that the war was over. And Karen? Well, I had a feeling she'd be a little more cautious the next time she tried to mess with someone. Sometimes, the best way to win isn't by fighting back with anger, but by showing you won't let anyone take away your peace or your Christmas tree.